Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, let's dive into one of the most significant and misunderstood geopolitical shifts unfolding in Asia. India, the world's most populous democracy and a rising economic power, is rethinking its strategy toward its biggest rival, China, and one of its long-term allies, the United States. Why is that happening? Well, it is because the global chessboard has changed, and so has the cost of choosing sides. As US President Trump escalated his rhetoric toward India, accusing it of choosing to do what it deems right, which is purchasing Russian commodities, Russian energy, India is now saying, look, Washington, enough is enough. Our economic policy will not be dictated from Washington, said India. And to drive that point home, India put on pause its purchases of American weapons, which, as we know, weapons is the main export of the United States. This is very much a story of India's pragmatic pivot toward China, a quiet, very cautious recalibration, if you will, in a world where old alliances no longer guarantee protection or partnership. So back in July, US President Trump slapped a 25% tariff on Indian goods, and then just a month later, Trump punished India with a 25% additional tariff because India made the decision to continue doing what's in its national interest, which is to purchase Russian energy. This move stunned New Delhi. New Delhi did not expect an additional 25% tariff. It wasn't just a trade policy decision, since India in many ways has been one of the key US security partners in the region. Trump's new tariffs were more of a punishment. It was clearly a punishment because India chose to continue purchasing Russian energy despite Trump's extensive threats. For years, India had walked a very tight rope, balancing ties between Beijing and Washington. But Trump's ever-changing and evolving his unpredictable policies effectively tore a hole in that balancing act. Trump was effectively tilting global dynamics and not in India's favor. For India's policymakers, it wasn't just about tariffs or social media posts. It was about a deeper fear, a deeper concern, if you will, that the United States was no longer a reliable strategic partner. So what did India do? It began to recalibrate. It began to shift its policies and its stance. The shift began at the end of 2024. In October, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping met for the very first time in 5 years. It was a truly landmark moment. Since the deadly Galwan border clashes of 2020, India had frozen most ties with Beijing. It imposed a ban on over 300 Chinese apps. It blocked investments and it tightened tax restrictions. But now both sides were effectively stepping back from that brink and re-engaging. And Washington should have noticed that, but because of its mounting hubris, it appears to still be blinded by the fantasy idea of being a global hegemon still. Indian troops resumed patrols along key points of the disputed border after the meeting. Chinese authorities restored pilgrimage routes to Kailash Mansarovar. Tourist visas reopened. Even civil society exchanges returned. It likely wasn't exactly a warm embrace. It wasn't easy, but it was a thaw. It was a step in the right direction. Behind this move was a very simple calculation. China controls 60% of global electronics manufacturing. Cutting Beijing out entirely wasn't feasible, especially when Indian companies had lost an estimated $15 billion due to curbs on Chinese suppliers. So, simply speaking, India wasn't surrendering, it was strategizing. Western critics didn't hesitate to call this shift a submission to China, that India is caving under pressure. But the narrative misses the point. This isn't about capitulation, it's about pragmatism. India is trying to protect its economy, to manage its border tensions, and also to keep its options open, all while the United States grows more transactional and hostile toward really the rest of the world, the entire world. Trump's second term has thrown India diplomacy into disarray. Tariffs are rising, exemptions are stalling. Trump even weaponized India's oil imports against India by placing secondary sanctions on the country. Add to that Trump's willingness to equate Pakistan's general with India's prime minister, and the writing is on the wall. With Washington pulling back, India is now likely feeling that the China option suddenly doesn't look so bad. Yes, the relationship is somewhat lopsided. Yes, the border remains quite tense, but China brings predictability, and what's even more important, China brings stability, unlike the United States. Under Trump, U.S. policies have clearly become a moving target, one that penalizes defiance but doesn't reward loyalty. Now even allies are rethinking their approach to dealing with the United States foreign policy establishment. India is effectively redefining its strategic autonomy. India still wants to become the world's third largest economy, and to achieve that goal, it needs capital, it needs technology and supply chains to get there. But it can't afford to be caught between two great powers, the United States and China, when one is quite unpredictable and arguably completely out of control and not really in touch with common sense when it comes to international relations. India appears to be re-engaging China. By re-engaging China, India is buying time, waiting out an election cycle perhaps in the United States, hoping for a return to a more stable, reliable Washington, and until then, it's playing the long game, holding firm when it matters, yielding where it's less costly, and never really losing sight of its own national interest. India's pivot to China isn't about weakness or choosing sides, not at all. It is about survival in a world where alliances no longer come with guarantees. And even more than that, alliances with the United States, a country that is a belligerent to a proxy war with Russia in Ukraine, and also that actively funds Israel's war in the Middle East. And so that alliance with the United States appears to be more and more questionable by the day. In an age of transactional diplomacy and geopolitical chess game, pragmatism might just be the only strategy that works these days. Let me know what you think about India's pivot to China and whether you think that this is a long-term game. What are your thoughts on this? I would love to hear from you in the comment section below. Thank you very much for watching, and if you found this helpful and interesting, hit like, subscribe, and follow me on Substack and Patreon. I'd love to see you there as well. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.